ghouls, ghosts, and Bigfoot. Oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girlz. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Here's your host, paranormal researcher Patricia Baker, on the one, the only Supernatural Girlz.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girlz Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker, and I am here with my co-host from Tucson, PK, Patricia Kirkman. How you doing tonight?
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. It's a wonderful day, bright sunshine, just warm enough, cool breeze. I'd almost think I was in the islands.
Oh, well, rub it in, why don't you? We're still freezing here on the East Coast, so I can't wait for all the snow to disappear, but then I just got some bad news. We got more snow coming in Friday night and Saturday. No, I kid you not. This
I'm
is
sorry for
disgusting April Fool's Day snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
No, we're not happy here.
No, I'm here. I'm giving you a teaser about it, and letting you know how great it is here, assuming you were going to finally get some decent weather. That'll teach me.
We can only hope. Well, listen, we got a lot of stuff going on tonight. We've got a terrific guest with a very, very hot topic on these very strange creatures that are intruding into our reality. We have black-eyed kids. We've got all kinds of shadow people. We have the wolf man. We've got all kinds of things to talk about tonight with our guest, David Weatherly, who is an investigator, author, and world explorer. He's going to be joining us shortly. And, you know, this is a very important guest and a very important show, and I'll tell you why I think this way. A lot of people think, well, we're just going to be talking about stories, and it's all going to be spooky and fun, but then at the end of the day, so what? Well, here's the so what. A lot of these things are coming into our reality, and people are seeing them and experiencing them more than ever before. And here's the deal. We need an entirely new paradigm to take this stuff on. It's time to let go of the thoughts that, oh, this person that's reporting it is crazy. They're not crazy. They're seeing what's happening, and they're telling us, and they're telling David Weatherly about it. I mean, he's a world-renowned investigator on all of this, but we need a whole new way of looking at the world to be able to deal with these things. So that's why this is important, and why David's work is so critical to establishing this new paradigm for all of us. So I'm so thrilled to have him on the show. I know you are too. We've been listening to his other podcasts, and I can't wait to hear what he's got to say about all this stuff.
That makes two of us. This has been amazing. The more I look into things that he has written, I go like, oh my God, I can't believe it. But well, we're going to find it, right? Get the rest of the story tonight, that's for sure.
We are. So fasten your seatbelts, everybody. But in the meantime, PK, what's going on with the numbers? Let's check into that first.
Well, today's really been a great day about loving and caring for one another, and that's excellent because we're at the last part of the month itself. But, you know, if you nurture yourself, you almost feel like you win the lottery today. That's how good it could have been for everybody, if they would allow it. It's tomorrow that's going to pose the issues that are not necessarily negative, but people are going to have difficulty sleeping tonight because it is one of those things where we're going to have a lot of things to think about. Dreams are going to be very much a part of everything going on. And it's a perfect time to allow yourself to meditate, share your thoughts, because tomorrow makes you an excellent teacher. So by all means, get out there, let that inner voice out to help others. It's really a gift that we've got, but we've got to use it.
All right. Well, I think we can do that. We've heard that a lot from you in the past few months, that it's time to reach out and help other people. So
it is.
That's all good. That's all good news, and it's something that we can all easily do. We have some great audience members, and they totally understand that.
Well, so, excuse me, I was just going to say the one thing is that we need to remember is that it is a one universal year, all about new beginnings. And for those that have been in a 9-year, going into the new 1 year without any repercussions, you have to have all the deadwood off the table by the 31st of this month. Just something to think about, folks.
Yeah,
exactly.
Get busy and clear that stuff away. Make room for the new. Well, we've got something that we think is fairly new, even though it happened last year. It's on our Facebook page, the Supernatural Girlz Facebook page. Mm-hmm. So you need to go there, everybody, and take a listen to this Henry McCabe audio. It is a voicemail that this gentleman left for his wife. He was walking back from a convenience store very late at night, 2:30 in the morning, and something, we don't know what, just took him by surprise. His body was found a few weeks later, no real cause of death established. And this voicemail that he left is, I think, one of the creepiest things, if not the creepiest thing I've ever heard.
Eerie, very eerie.
Now, they didn't allow us to hear the whole thing, and that's a shame, and the broadcaster is talking over it. And I know people have tried to get the entire voicemail released, but they're refusing to release it. It's an ongoing case. However, they did mention at the end of this voicemail, somebody says, "Stop it." The question is who and why? So we are interested in what you have to say about this here in the audience. So be sure to connect with us on Facebook, connect with us on Twitter. Just send us your emails. What do you think happened to Henry McCabe? It is quite the mystery. And there's a lot of people that have gone missing, and there are strange events that just are all around their disappearances. And it's very concerning, not just happening in our national parks, it's also happening in urban areas. Mm-hmm. So we got to find out what's going on here, because we're all at risk. Who knows? It could happen to anybody. You don't have to be hiking in a remote trail to have this kind of thing happen, apparently. So anyways, go to our Facebook page, check it out. You will not be disappointed. When I say it's creepy, it is creepy. So
gets one's attention, right?
Oh, God. I'll tell you what. I mean, I gave it to a police friend of mine, and it creeped him out so badly, didn't want anything more to do with it. So take a listen. Give us your thoughts, your feelings, your theories. We're very interested in what you have to say. So tonight, as I mentioned, we have a terrific guest, David Weatherly. He is an investigator, author, and world explorer. He has spent his life pursuing the world of the strange, investigating cases around the globe. He's researched and written on a diverse range of topics, including cryptozoology, hauntings, ufology, ancient mysteries, shamanism, and psychic phenomenon. Now, he's the author of a number of books, including Black-Eyed Children and Strange Intruders, and we're going to talk to him about these strange intruders tonight and these black-eyed kids. What are they? Where are they coming from? What do we do to stay safe? There's a lot we need to find out. So, David, welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's our pleasure. Now, let's see. There's so much to talk about. You're an expert on all of these mysterious things that are coming into our reality more now than ever before, it seems. Is that right?
That's correct. And I don't know if there are any experts, but, it's certainly, I put a lot of effort into exploring this phenomenon and trying to document and chronicle as much of it as I can.
Well, you're doing a great job because you're providing information. You're making us think about this, and hopefully we're going to get to the bottom of a few things tonight. But first of all, let's start with the Black-Eyed Children. You have an entire book about this, and you've interviewed a number of people. Some people seem to think that this phenomenon started in the 90s, but actually you found out it started before that.
That's correct. There's a common misconception that this is a relatively new phenomena that started in the mid to late 1990s. What I believe on that is that there was a modern wave of these sightings that did indeed start around that time period. And this really came to light because of a gentleman named Brian Bethel. If anybody knows anything about the Black-Eyed Kids at this point, they've probably heard Brian's story. Brian was a journalist in Abilene, Texas. He went out one night to write a check to pay a bill, and he was going to drop it in a drop slot. And as he was sitting in his vehicle writing this check out, these two boys approached his car. Now, Brian was not in a bad neighborhood or anything, but he felt very uneasy as these kids approached him. So he only rolled his window down just a little bit, and this strange conversation ensued. And these children, the lead boy was saying things like, "Hey, mister, we want to see a movie, and we forgot our money, so we need you to take us to our mother." And, Bethel was trying to kind of be aware and watch his surroundings and take in exactly what was going on here and why he felt strange. And as this dialogue unfolded, he had the clarity of mind to glance over the movie marquee and realize that the movie they wanted to see was already well underway. So it wasn't adding up. And he was clearly resisting the idea of giving them a ride anywhere, which made them a bit more persistent. And one of the boys said, "Come on, mister, we're just a couple of kids." As this was happening, Bethel finally was able to make eye contact with this boy and realized that this kid had solid black eyes. And this was enough. This was enough to put him, over the edge of what he was willing to deal with. So he threw the car in reverse and he pulled quickly out of the spot and drove away. Now, as he was pulling away, he glanced in his rearview mirror and he saw that these kids had vanished, and there wasn't really anywhere for them to hide. They were just simply gone. Now, Bethel posted this account on an early internet forum, and he was the one who came up with this acronym BEK, Black-Eyed Kids. It stuck, and that is really an important sort of key factor when we look at the history of these encounters and understanding how far back these go. So if we look at Bethel's case, and to kind of finish that story, once he posted this account, a lot of other people jumped into the mix and said, "Oh, I've experienced something like that," and other people shared their accounts. Bethel, in fact, got so overwhelmed with people contacting him about the encounter that for a while he just completely shut down. He was, you couldn't reach him by email or anything else. He wouldn't answer people. He just got really kind of over the edge with it. So this account, spurred all these other people to come forward and post their own accounts. And what we have is this weird mix where there's a core of something that happened, but there's so many stories that are added in that a lot of people begin to think that this was a modern myth born on the internet.
Right. That's what a lot of people do think.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and people still believe this. Now, as I mentioned, one of the key factors in looking at these cases is this acronym BEK. Bethel coined that phrase when he was, having his dialogue about his encounter, and as I stated, it really stuck, and other people started using it. But if we remove that acronym and you look at the facts of, some of the highlights of these cases and examine the specific traits of these creatures or beings and carry that back through history, then you can actually find a pretty long trail of these kind of accounts. It's just that anything prior to Bethel's account, the term BK was not used. So when I wrote the book's been out 5 years now. It came out in 2012. And when I researched the book, which was in 2010 and 2011, I really wanted to dig in and find out if this was indeed something that was just a recent internet phenomena at the time, or if it was something much older. So when I stumbled upon this idea of just looking for the traits of the encounters, then that's when I found a lot of older cases that predated the internet and even television and everything else. And even to this day, these cases continue to surface. There are a lot of researchers now delving into it, and on a regular basis, people find these accounts. There's new encounters all the time, and then people find older accounts that fit the same parameters.
Now, these black eyes, they're just always associated with demonic entities. I mean, you see it a lot on television. I mean, Supernatural, great show. And whenever they encounter a demon, the eyes go black. So that's the association. Is there anything in your research that supports that these are demonic entities?
Well, the thing that's intriguing about the phenomena itself is this. If you really examine the cases, it's one of these things that you can make an argument for a lot of different possibilities as to what they are. When I wrote the book, I didn't try to push my personal opinion or any particular possibility. I did chapters on the connections between these BKs and the demonic, which is an easy argument to make, but likewise, it's easy to look at the cases and say, well, these could be some kind of an alien hybrid, because there's a stunning similarity in the appearance of these kids and the classic gray alien that everyone is used to seeing, since Communion from the 1980s. So it's really strange. You can break down the phenomenon and say, well, it could be this or it could be that. To answer your question in terms of the demonic, yeah, there are a lot of correlations, quite frankly, because, you have this what appears to be a human, but not quite. Now, in classic demonology, there's a belief that a demon can take human form, but not completely. Something has to be misshapen or distorted, whether that is, a hand or a foot or perhaps the eyes. So that's kind of a big key connection between these things and the demonic, but so is the idea that they have to be invited in, apparently, because there are no cases that I have ever seen in all these years where these black-eyed kids intrude upon someone's space without permission. They always ask permission. They ask, and the scenarios, there's a wide range of them. These things show up at people's homes, at places of business. They approach people in parking lots, in their cars, hotel rooms, boats, you name it. And whenever they show up, they want you to invite them in. They want you to give them a ride, or they want you to ask them in the house or into the room or whatever it is. They're trying to elicit that invitation.
And that is so similar to vampires. That is,
it is
total vampire lore. They can't come into your house unless you invite them in.
Yeah, and that's something else I delve into too, just because of it's interesting to delve into folklore and look at how it's reflected in a lot of these phenomena that people are encountering even to this day. So, you go back to the old country and look at traditional vampire folklore and sort of carry that through to what we have now. There is a connecting thread there. And it makes us question exactly what were these people experiencing, because everybody interprets according to their spiritual beliefs or their, cultural constructs or whatnot, and the time period and so forth. So, people writing in the past about these incidents are trying their best with their level of understanding to interpret what they think they've encountered. It's important, I think, for investigators and researchers now to look at those cases and try to look at them with a fresh eye and perhaps a modern interpretation.
Yes, I mean, we agree with that completely. And let's revisit what you were just talking about a few minutes ago with the alien hybrid possibility. It does sound reasonable to consider that for a number of reasons, not only because they may look similar, but they may be failed hybrids. I mean, maybe these are the ones that didn't work out. Maybe these are the ones that didn't accept souls, and so they're out there in a soulless situation, looking to find something to bond with. But it also, what I found interesting about these creatures is they have a foul odor. What do you think that's about?
That shows up in a percentage of cases, but not all of them. And Again, this is something that is often associated with the demonic, and once again, it's associated with vampire lore. Now, people's mindset is different now about vampires because, we're used to things like True Blood and the whole, sexy vampire image.
Right. Vampire Diaries. Sure.
Bela Lugosi and we won't mention the dreaded Twilight, where they all sparkle, but
I know, really.
But seriously, I mean, the point is that it's become a bit absurd, and that's why I do mention Twilight. And people's perceptions of vampires have become so far removed from the traditional lore. If you go really deep back, you'll find that vampires were often described as being hideous in appearance. They were bloated corpses very often because they had consumed, they had feasted on blood, and they were literally creatures that crawled out of the grave. So of course they had this hideous odor of decay about them. And again, this is something that in a percentage of these encounters with these black-eyed kids, people talk about this horribly foul odor that, some people say that it's so bad they think they're going to pass out. There was an account that I had from a gentleman who said that the smell was so bad. He was wearing a uniform at the time of his encounter, and he said that he had to, just get rid of the clothes and burn them because the smell wouldn't come out.
Oh my!
So there is something very strange and of course unsettling about that, but we don't know what it is, and it's all the more curious because, as I said, it only shows up in a portion of the accounts. Maybe, gosh, I don't know. I'd say from what I've seen, an average of maybe 20% of the cases talk about that, which is, it's a fairly small amount overall, but it's enough to be a little bit significant and more than just a one-off. Right.
Now, most people get deeply terrified when they encounter these children. I mean, it's just a visceral fear they can't shake. And it seems like the fear overtakes them to the point where they don't think about anything like photography, doing a video. I mean, some of the things that might help your cause in investigating this. Do you have any photographs or videos from people who had the wherewithal to take them during an encounter?
I have one or two that I've never shown, and I probably won't just because I can't I can't, be sure that they're valid. It's, of course, that's a standard question I ask when I talk to people, but I don't put a lot of focus or stock into that for a couple of reasons. One is that it's such an easy thing to manipulate now with technology. It's very simple to in just a couple of minutes, make any picture look like a black-eyed person. Additionally, we have the situation where there are now these full sclera contact lenses available. So, ultimately, sometimes I get these cases where it seems like there are some questionable things and could be a hoax, and you can buy these things to give the appearance of solid black eyes. So, I don't find that to be a big factor. What I find more intriguing, I tell you, is that there have been a number of accounts where security cameras were present. And all right. They did not function properly during the time period that this encounter occurred. So, I know we were talking a little bit before the show about electronic interference, and this is something else that is a hallmark of a lot of these black-eyed kid encounters. A lot of people report that electronics go, all wonky, that their phones stop working or shut off. People have reported their cars dying. It's really odd, and it's something that, in fact, connects to yet another strange character, and that's the classic MIB, or Man in Black. And,
okay.
There are some correlations, oddly enough, between the Men in Black and the black-eyed children.
Yes, well, they have the same pasty skin, right?
That's correct.
And now, with Men in Black, I've heard that they have some differences in their eyes also, that they may not be totally black, but parts of their eyes could be black. Is that the similarity?
That's correct. A good friend of mine is quite the authority on the Men in Black, Nick Redfern, and he's written several books. And I actually contributed a piece to one of his books about the correlations between the black-eyed kids and the Men in Black. And we've discussed it at length. It's really odd because even though these appear to be children, the similarities are that they have the pale or pasty skin. Some people will describe the Men in Black as being either Asian or possibly Mediterranean. I hear that same thing from black-eyed kid encounters. And then there's the monotone language, which is often found in accounts of both of these particular things. And
Right.
there's also the lack of understanding of what common items are. For instance, there's a classic Men in Black encounter where an MIB is given a Jell-O cup and doesn't know, what it is or what to do with it. And it's kind of, tries to drink it or something, is clearly unaware of what this thing is. And there are some similar things that have occurred in black-eyed kid encounters where they just don't seem to have knowledge of everyday items that any of us would instantly recognize. There's a couple of things about that. One is that these kids average, when people describe them, they average in age from about 10 to the early teens. Now, I challenge you to go down to your local shopping mall and see how many kids in that age range you can find that don't have a cell phone in their hands, or an iPod.
Exactly.
Or are plugged in.
Right.
I have never heard a case.
Yeah, they just don't exist anymore. Yeah.
Having any of these items. They never have cell phones, iPods, headphones, nothing. It's never reported.
That's an excellent point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very strange thing, and it was one of the first things I found curious when I started collecting the accounts, because I have a long list of questions I like to ask people if they don't provide the information. I ask if they notice these things, and it's funny to see how shocked people are, because they don't think about that. But then when they think about it, when you ask them and they think about it, and they say, well, no, they didn't appear to have a cell phone or any of this. And the other thing that happens is that no one has ever noticed a blemish on any of these children. No freckle, no mole, no pimple. And again, these are teens and preteens. So, it's right in that age when, puberty's setting in and a lot of changes are going on, and nope, never noticed.
So they're clearly not human. I mean, we're safe to say that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that.
Yes,
Definitely.
they are not human. And most of the people, they follow their gut instinct. They're overwhelmed by fear, and they don't let them in. But then we've heard you may have some cases where people let them in, and after the break, we're going to want to hear about that, because that sounds so frightening and so potentially dangerous. So we want to hear about anybody you've talked to and interviewed that has let them inside their home or their car or whatever. Now, before we go to break too, I just want to mention, and I'm sure you've heard this, David, that some people are identifying these black-eyed kids with dark matter, that these are dark matter beings, and that's also one of the reasons you don't ever want them near you. Have you heard that?
I've heard that. There's a lot of speculation as to what these things may or may not be. So, just about, you'd be surprised at how many theories are out there at this point.
Yeah, well, we got people thinking, and thanks to your great work, you have a lot of people thinking about a lot of these creatures that have invaded our reality. So we're going to take a short break. In the meantime, during the break, if you want to go listen to the Henry McCabe audio. It is on our Facebook page. So take a listen and then rejoin us. We are going to come back and hear the rest of these stories. Amazing. Our great guests that we're talking to tonight, David Weatherly, Black-Eyed Kids and Other Intruders. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Supernatural Girlz Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I'm here with my co-host, PK, and we are here with our terrific and very important guest tonight, David Weatherly. And he's the author of numerous books about intruders into our reality. He's the author of Black-Eyed Children, Strange Intruders, and many more. And we are going to get to the bottom of some of this tonight with David. So, David, we were talking before the break about people who had the misfortune to not listen to their gut instinct and who may have let these people into their homes or cars or something.
Yeah, there's a few of those cases. You were referencing people's reaction when they encounter these beings, and I kind of have it broken down into 3 stages that are typical during an encounter. The first is an initial uneasiness. As soon as they open the door, sometimes when they just hear the knock on the door, which it's always a knock, they never use the doorbell. It's another one of those things that they don't seem to understand what doorbells are. So it's always this long, persistent knock. And the victim usually will feel initially uneasy when they open the door, even though it appears to be a child. That uneasiness quickly goes to a more nervous state. And this is the state at which the alarm bells are going off. And this is a real psychological battle for people, because as adults, we're sort of hardwired to help a kid. If a kid shows up at your door and says, lady, I need to use the telephone, or, I need to use the bathroom, and your natural reaction is to help a kid. But what happens when that natural reaction is being pushed against by all your natural alarm bells, whatever those are? The hair on the back of the neck is going up, you're getting, butterflies in the stomach, something is wrong. So I like to point out for people unfamiliar with this phenomena that in most of these encounters, these kids are usually, they're sort of standing there looking down at their shoes. They're not making eye contact initially. Most kids don't. It's sort of a natural thing when a child approaches an adult. A lot of times they sort of have their heads down a little bit, or they don't, make direct eye contact.
Yeah,
initially.
that might be mistaken for the child being shy.
Right, exactly, and that's usually the case. Sometimes they're wearing hoodies, which is a common artistic depiction of these kids, with the hoods up. So usually the eyes are not noticed right away during these encounters. And what happens is, once this person reaches that really nervous state, these kids suddenly make eye contact, and that pushes the victim over the edge. Panic mode kicks in, and all they can think is they have to get away. They have to get away from these kids. They have to, run, slam the door, drive away, whatever it is.
So there's some self-preservation that kicks in at that point.
Oh, absolutely is what happens. So in terms of people actually inviting them in, this is sort of a interesting territory we get into, because for one thing, there are very, very few of these cases that I've had that I thought were valid, because when I interview these people who've had these experiences, they usually come across as a trauma victim. That's really the best term to describe how these people behave after encountering these kids. They typically have a lot of symptoms that arise. They have paranoia, sometimes outright paranoia, but their sleep patterns get broken. They develop nervous conditions. They often can't go back to the location where the incident occurred. So there's a whole range of things they experience. And with the internet stories, there are a lot of them that float around out there saying, I let the black-eyed children in and now I'm dying, and these types of things. And, unfortunately, we're never really able to pursue, to follow up and interview the person, sit down with them and get the facts and so forth. The few cases I do have, unfortunately, there's a couple of really incredible ones that I simply can't talk about because of the nature of the accounts and the victims asking me not to share their stories, even though they told me their story. They just don't want it out there publicly. But there is one that is in the book that is a pretty strange case, and it involves I'll just tell you the account. It was a woman who was driving home from work, and she had her son in the back seat. She pulled into a little convenience mart, jumped out, left her child in the vehicle, and this is a rural community. Everybody knows everybody. This is one of those things she's done a million times. So she jumps out, she runs in, she grabs her bread and her milk, and she comes back out, and she does what a lot of us do on autopilot. She jumps in the vehicle, she's closing the door and looking up in the rearview mirror as she's putting the car in gear, ready to roll out. And when she looks in the rearview mirror, she sees a pair of black eyes kind of staring back at her.
Oh my God.
Now, her son was sitting directly behind the driver's seat, and now suddenly there's this other boy who is in the very middle of the back seat. So he's actually up against her son, which is odd in and of itself, and he's staring at her in the mirror. Now she's instantly terrified, and she jumps back out of the vehicle. She opens the back door, snatches her son out, and runs back into the market. The clerk in the market, of course, sees, her running in a panic, and he's thinking, my God, what's happened? And he's asking her, and she's kind of stuttering and stammering about somebody being in her vehicle. He runs outside. There's the vehicle, engine running, doors open, nobody around, no sign of anyone.
So the kid is gone.
The kid is gone.
Black-eyed kid's gone. Okay.
So now she, the clerk is thinking, what is this? Is this some kind of carjacking? I'm going to call the police. And she insists, no. She won't tell the clerk what she saw. But in fact, she's so distraught that she doesn't want to drive her vehicle. So she calls her husband, who's fairly close by. She doesn't tell him what's happening. Only she just insists that he comes up to the convenience mart, which he does. It only takes him a few minutes. And she says, I can't drive my vehicle. We need to switch vehicles, or something. So they end up switching vehicles. She takes her son, takes her husband's vehicle, and goes home. He jumps into her. He jumps into her vehicle. He heads her home also. However, he's in an accident.
Oh no!
Totals the vehicle, ends up in the hospital, and doesn't know exactly what happened. And he reports to the physicians that the last thing he remembers was a weird odor, and then he passed out. He thinks he passed out. He thinks he blacked out or something. So, here again, we have this whole foul odor thing. Now, the doctors in the hospital thought, well, maybe it's some kind of gas or something that caused him to black out. We just don't know. So they keep him for observation in case he has a concussion. Meanwhile, the mother, who, eventually calms down, is trying to talk to her son and asks some questions. And she says, do you know that boy from school or something? Who was he? And the son replies, no, Mommy, I don't know him. And she says, well, why was he in our vehicle? And her son's response, which was very chilling to her, was, well, I asked him to get in, Mommy. I thought we could go to my house and play.
Ay, ay, ay.
So,
Wow.
Here we have a young child who doesn't, essentially doesn't operate in the same way that we do, because he doesn't recognize that there's anything wrong with this, but he's just seen a potential playmate. Now, the story gets a little bit more bizarre because this young boy became very ill. And they ended up taking him to the hospital. The doctors proceeded to try to diagnose him. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, because every time they thought they knew what it was, the symptoms changed. So, it ranged from, at one point, they thought his appendix had ruptured. They were going to do surgery. Then he breaks out in what they thought were measles. And as they're trying to treat that, it goes away. Something else comes in. And the symptoms change so much. And it's so all over the place. They just can't, they don't know what to do. So the parents, who know, obviously have not told the doctors, look, there was a black-eyed kid in my car. They finally decide, that no, we're going to take him home and observe him. If it gets worse, we'll bring him back. Because, at some point it came, maybe he has, some kind of flu or something like that. So the parents said, okay, well, they kind of pushed that possibility. They took the child home, and they eventually, what they did was they called people from their church, and they started having a prayer circle around this child. And eventually he completely recovered, and everything, all the symptoms and everything else went away. The last I talked to these people, he was still living a completely normal life and was completely healthy, but it was such a bizarre set of circumstances. And obviously it ensued from his close proximity and physical contact to this black-eyed kid.
Wow. Well, here's the thing, David. It's one thing when people have a sighting, when they see something like the black-eyed children or something else. But when it has this type of physical effect that's so negative, the car crash, the illness, then it becomes so much more sinister.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And across the board in all types of phenomena, this is always a much smaller percentage of what we deal with, because, whether it's UFOs or Sasquatch or ghost or whatever, very often it's a fairly simple encounter in one way or another, and I'm not trying to make that sound trivial. It's just that, there's literally thousands of people who saw a UFO, for instance, and that's the sighting. It was there are often crazy aspects to the sighting, but it's an entirely different set of circumstances when we have something, for instance, like the Travis Walton case, where he's abducted, he disappears, and there are all these physical repercussions and aspects to what happened, and it takes it to a completely different level, that's for sure.
It does. And again, with abductions and things like that in the past, we've had a lot of wonderful abductees. In fact, Travis has been with us on the show. It still feels like a linear experience at the end of the day. This does not. This has so many other components to it. And again, the physical threat is real. There's a real physical threat that people are reacting to. And again, this is one of the reasons I think your work is so very important, because people have to become aware that these things are coming into our reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the compliments on my work. There's so much more that we all have to learn, really. And, I'm glad to see other people delving into some of this stuff now, because there's so many of these cases. There really are. I get emails, all week, every week I get accounts from people, and not just about the black-eyed kids, but a wide array of stuff. And, there's a lot of other researchers that are getting accounts too, and they're getting different ones than I get. So, the database is certainly growing, and that's important.
Gosh, well, at least we have that happening. And again, thanks to you and other researchers who are taking this on. But you're one of the originals. You're one of the first. Now, I've got a few interesting questions for you, David, from the chat room before we go on. This is from Roger Kessler. Now, his question is, do any of these kids show up in missing children databases?
That's a great question. Not that I have discovered, no. No.
Yeah, this is a great question.
That's a very disturbing possibility. But and oddly enough, I guess we were talking about this off air. Okay, so the black-eyed kid concept has sort of bled over into some areas of popular media now and entertainment. You'll see this black-eyed effect show up in a lot of things. It showed up in different vampire stories. Supernatural utilizes it to represent demons and things like that.
Right.
It's an easy effect, and it's very creepy. So as we would expect, this has shown up, with using children in certain films and other areas of entertainment. So there is a comic book now that is being written. It's called BEK, Black Eyed Kids, and it's a straight-out horror comic book written by an award-winning writer, a guy named Joe Pruitt, and it's really a great series. I do columns now for the back of the magazine to talk about some real BEK cases, but a long way getting back to the point, but the point was that when Joe wrote the story, he didn't read any of the Black Eyed Kid material. He didn't want to be influenced by any of it, so he just took the concept and sort of ran with it. And there is a whole aspect to the story about these being kids who are sort of converted and they become black-eyed children in the storyline. So ties into what Roger was talking about.
Exactly.
But, to get back to that, no, in terms of real cases, I've never seen any correlation between that. I do know that the number of children that disappear on a regular basis is incredibly disturbing. It's a very high number, and it's very unsettling. But I think that there's something much more sinister in human terms going on with those disappearances.
Wow.
Have there been more disappearances over the last few years than earlier?
Oh, yeah. The number, if you look at the FBI stats, the number of disappearances has indeed been on the rise the last few years. And I can't remember right off what the current stats are, but every year it seems to go up pretty significantly, both of children and adults. And, there's a lot of information coming out now. This is not paranormal, but there's a lot of information coming out now that are helping people understand exactly how bad the human trafficking problem is.
Definitely.
Much more advanced than people realize. So
yes, exactly.
That's certainly what is at play, I think, with a lot of that. Whether there's something paranormal going on or not, I don't know. I remember when the book first came out, when Black Eyed Children first came out, I had a conversation with Whitley Strieber, and he himself had an encounter with Black Eyed Children. But his question to me was, or his statement to me was that he was much more disturbed by the idea that there were people who were encountering these kids who we never hear from again. And, when you think about it, that is it's a very creepy thought. It's very unsettling. How many people actually do let them in and they're among the vanished? We just don't know. I mean, we can speculate, but it's something to sort of ponder. We don't have any facts or anything to point to that, but there are a lot of different disappearances that have very unusual circumstances around them.
Very strange. Now, here's another question. This is from Space Traveler, who asks, are we assuming that these children do not age beyond their childlike appearance?
Well, personally, I don't believe they're children anyway. I think they're just assuming the form of children.
Yes.
So
makes sense.
Yeah, the answer would be I don't think they're aging.
Yeah, they're just in one certain presentation. Now, here's another question. This is from Daria, and she says, these kids sound like bad characters out of a Charles Dickens book. Do you think they were even born from natural childbirth?
Personally, I don't know. No. Hey, here's the thing about this phenomenon, as I stated earlier, when I wrote the book, it's broken down to examine the similarities between these encounters and a whole range of different phenomena, whether it's the Men in Black, hybrids, alien hybrids, demons, and whatnot. And you can argue for all of those different identities for these kids, for whatever they are. But my personal opinion is I don't think they're anything human at all. So I don't think that they adhere to any kind of human rules.
I agree.
That would discard anything like, natural birth or aging or all those types of things.
Yes, exactly. They're not going to follow any of the rules we would follow in our reality. And again, it's frightening to think these things can come in and out of our reality the way they do. And we know so little about them.
That's right. Yeah.
So you have investigated much more, as you mentioned, than the black-eyed children. And I'm going to leave it to you to suggest what we should talk about next. There are so many intruders. What are some of your favorites? Let's go there, if there is such a thing.
I'm intrigued by all of this stuff. I mean, I've been in this field for 40 years now, and it all just fascinates me, from haunted locations to cryptids and everything else in between. In terms of what you're asking and what we're discussing here tonight, if you want to talk about something that I think is highly important for people to be aware of and to understand right now, I'd say top of the list, even above the black-eyed children, is the jinn.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, okay, let's talk about that. I know we've had a guest on the show who wrote a book about the jinn, but it didn't really reveal to us some of the dangers involved and the history involved, because these are some ancient entities, aren't they? They've been around for many thousands of years.
Right. So this goes back to the very roots of Islam. And it's important to understand, first of all, for those who don't know, a lot of people aren't familiar with the term jinn. And, it's kind of funny to start talking to people about that, and they're not sure what the jinn are. And say, well, in the West, we call them genies. And then
that sounds a lot nicer, doesn't it?
It does. And you see the sort of gleam in the eye, and therein lies the rub, as they say, because if you're a little bit older, like I am, and somebody says genie, you probably think of Barbara Eden, dancing around in her harem pants, bumbling all of her magic up.
Right.
Yes, the younger generations, you say genie, and they might think of Disney's big blue guy trying to help Aladdin and so forth.
Right.
And those perceptions of the jinn or genies are incredibly misleading, and I think were put in place intentionally to sort of make fun and make people not take these things seriously.
Wow.
The jinn are as I said, they're very, very old beings. In the teachings of Islam, it says that Allah created three races. He created humans, He created angels, and He created jinn.
Oh, boy. Well, we're in for it. Now, we're going to take another very short commercial break here. So, everybody, stay tuned, because you've got to hear this about the jinn. It is very important information that David's going to be talking about. In the meantime, during the break, you can go back to our Facebook page, take another listen, if you haven't already, to that Henry McCabe audio, and give us your thoughts on what you think that is. Join us in the chat room, irnchat.com. We're always happy to hear from our listeners. And stay tuned, everybody. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode here. We have a terrific guest tonight. So, I'm your host, Patricia Baker, here with PK, my co-host, and our guest, David Weatherly, talking about very important stuff, and you all need to listen carefully to the next segment of this show. David, you're talking to us about the jinn. So please explain more. What are these things? They've been around forever. What are they? And what are they capable of doing to us?
So as we talked about before the break, a lot of people in the West are familiar with this term genie, but the actual term jinn comes out of the Middle East and is connected to Islam. As I stated before we went to break, Islamic teaching says that Allah created three races. He created humans, angels, and jinn. Now, in the tale, what happens is that Allah commands that the angels and the jinn bow down to the superiority of man. The jinn refused to do this, so Allah banished them. Now, this gets pretty fascinating when you look at this and a lot of these ancient teachings talking about this concept, because although the jinn are banished, they're still here. So how do we really reconcile that in modern understanding? When you dig into a lot of this stuff, it sounds like they are still on our plane of existence, but not quite. And when you go particularly to the Middle East or Asia, you hear people talk about these entities. You hear all these stories that they can live, the jinn can be in abandoned buildings, they can be in rocks in the desert, they can be in an object. So they can be in all these different things and they can dwell there. And because they were banished due to the argument with Allah, they sort of have a vendetta against human beings. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of the whole hierarchy of the jinn, and when you really get into it, you'll find that some people believe there's a whole different groups and sort of caste of jinn. Some of them are content to just stay to themselves. Others are much more sinister in nature and are constantly looking for opportunities to interfere with mankind. Now, a lot of people think, oh, this sounds creepy, and it kind of sounds like it's interesting folklore and so on and so forth. But it's a lot more complex than that, because here's an important factor in the laws of Islam. If you are a practicing Muslim, you are required to believe everything that is written in the Quran. Now, the Quran says that the jinn exist. So let's step back for a moment and consider that at the moment, I think the current count is that there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. So right now at this moment, we have 1.6 billion people who believe in the existence of the jinn.
So does that feed them? Does that make them more powerful?
What do you think?
I think it does. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling, and we could really go down the rabbit hole with this, because then you get into, what does the collective consciousness do and co-create, and what effect is that belief from that many people having? But if we assume for a moment that these entities are indeed real and are anxious to interfere with mankind, then you start looking at other avenues of possibilities for how they may interfere with people. Now, you asked about the abilities of the jinn, and that's where it gets really kind of scary, because in all the ancient lore, we find that their powers, if you will, are pretty wide-ranging. They can shapeshift. They can become invisible. They can travel in a flash from one location to another. They can take the form or assume the voice of your friends or relatives, living or dead.
So they're tricksters.
They are, but it's that's a generalization that you really have to examine a bit more closely, because they aren't tricksters in the way that, for instance, coyote is to the Native Americans. They are much darker very often, and it's important to understand that we are now, let's see, more than 10 years into having a strong Western presence in the Middle East, since the first Gulf War, really. So, we're pretty far along now in this. And, there's been a constant rotation of American military and civil workers in various parts of the Middle East, all who are going over there and interacting with this culture, and this aspect of this culture is not really understood by most of the Western mind. So I have had many, many cases of people, especially from people in the military, who served time in the Middle East, and they came back and they began to have strange experiences. Now, I'll give you a typical case. I had a gentleman who got in touch with me, and he needed help, and he started explaining the things going on in his home, and he contacted me. At first, he thought it was a poltergeist that he was dealing with in his home. Now, this took a fair number of conversations and a lot of investigative work to start to get all the details out of this guy. But the long and short was, what happened with him was that after his time in the military, he came home, and he needed a job and so forth, and he found that he started hearing the voice of his deceased mother, who was giving him psychic information. He thought he was very blessed. He was never really prone to this kind of thing, but he sort of rolled with it, and I think he was at a low point in his life, and he kind of rolled with this and accepted it. And this intuitive information, or this psychic information that came to him, was very beneficial initially. So, the voice of his mother would tell him, go to this place on this day at this time and apply for a job. And it worked. And he got this great job. And, sequentially, there were a bunch of things like that happened. And it was all really good fortune. But what happened was, he sort of became, I don't know if I'd use the word addictive, but he became very reliant, I'll say, on this, the voice of his mother telling him things. Now, as he was becoming more and more reliant on the information from this source, other things were going on in his home. His wife became ill. His children started misbehaving more, and other things started happening. Now, things took a darker turn because he started to experience misfortune. Things like his car breaking down or getting stolen. And they were having problems with the household. They had broken pipes. He lost his job. All these things started happening. And the voice kept telling him, no, it'll be okay. You have to do this next. And he couldn't stop listening to it. Now, things got so bad, it was tearing his family apart. And, somebody, finally he reached out and he started contacting a couple of people. And somebody along the way said, you're dealing with something much more serious than you realize. And, talk to this guy, by the way. So he ends up with my phone number, and I end up with having conversations with him. And eventually determining, after asking him numerous times, what did you bring back from the Middle East? He insisted, again and again. He gave me a whole list. He sent me photographs of what he brought back. Nothing suspicious. But, numerous conversations with him and having him re-examine it, so on and so forth. Well, lo and behold, one day I got a call from him, and he was in such a state, and he said, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. What I found, to make a long story short, he had searched his bags again that came back with him, and he found in a small outside pouch a piece of jewelry. Now, when he found it, the memory kind of came rushing back to him, and he told me the story, and he said, we, we being some of the other guys, were kind of, drinking one day, and we were at this market, and we ran into this guy, and he told me that this piece of jewelry had a powerful jinn in it, and that it would, take care of my wishes. And I bought it on a lark, and threw it in this pouch and forgot about it.
Wow. So there you have it. There's a strong reality to all of the. Oh my goodness. So how did you direct him? What did you tell him to do with this thing?
Well, I worked with him to free him of the jinn. I won't go into the details of how I did that because it's personal. All these cases have to be dealt with on an individual basis. And
right.
In his case, there were certain things that had to be done. And I gave him some instruction and helped him with some things. And we were able to take care of this piece of jewelry, and we were able to, get his whole family to a point where they were essentially attachment free and cleansed and recovering and so forth, and moving forward, with their lives, and of course able to rebuild, and things got much better. But the thing is that there are so many people who are encountering these types of things, and I've got so many of these stories that are similar to this, because these jinn, I worked many years ago with a Sufi, and this was back in the early 90s, and he taught me a lot about the jinn from his perspective, being Middle Eastern. And he would say that they were very insidious, and that they would weave a web around a person in order to lure them in, and to have them fully trapped, so that they could have them so controlled that then they would turn things to a more sinister direction. And that's where they got their fulfillment, in seeing people suffer in that way. So now, we have this situation, like I said, where there's so much interaction. Our cultures, all of our cultures are changing, because, we're a global race now. We're constantly interacting with people from around the world, and many are not prepared for the reality of some of the more supernatural elements of some of these cultures, and what the potential is. And there are people, just like there are jinn, that want more sinister things to occur. And there are stories out there about people in the Middle East who are attempting to use the jinn to do their bidding for more sinister events.
Well, this then becomes a real issue that people need to wrap their minds around. And I think it's people like you, David, it's up to you to help us to understand this, and then what we can do about it, how to become aware of something like this that's so powerful, that comes out of ancient times and also from another culture that we don't really understand.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. There's so much to learn. And, I tell everyone in these cases, whatever your spiritual beliefs are, look to that, and make sure that you are protected to some degree, especially if you're going to delve into this stuff to any degree. There's so many people now in the field who kind of rush into it because they think it's a thrill or a kick, or they've seen it on television, and they really aren't prepared for the physical aspects of what doing this research entails.
Well, that's true. And I think, again, as we discussed in the beginning of the show, we need an entirely new paradigm to embrace all of this, because the time has passed for discounting it and saying it doesn't exist and playing skeptic. I mean, those times are over. And people need to understand that these things that are happening are real. They do have history. They do have names. And we need to become more astute at finding out what they're up to. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff also, David, is gone about in the wrong way. It's really important, I think, to develop some type of communication with some of these things, not all of them, but some of them, so that we know what their true motivation is. I mean, again, let's go back to the black-eyed kids. I think most people are terrified with good reason. But I think anybody has thought maybe we should communicate with them and find out what they're really up to. Ask them the questions, because they're coming to us, asking us questions. Can I come into your house? Can I come into your car? Take me here, take me there, or whatever. Let me in. And we're so afraid that we're not throwing questions back at them. Where do you come from? Who are you? What do you want here in this universe? You don't belong here. Why are you here? I mean, those would be some of the things I hope somebody who's grounded enough can ask those questions and maybe demand answers from these things.
Yeah, well, to a certain degree, people have asked them questions. I mean, not something as broad as, what are you doing in this universe or something like that. But, just by the nature of the encounters, there are people who have asked them simple questions. Where are your parents? Do you live in this building?
Right.
Why are you at my apartment? There are a lot of these types of questions, and these are questions that, any normal functioning adult who's puzzled by the situation is probably going to say something like that,
right?
Because, everybody will say if it's an encounter that occurs, for instance, at, a person's home or in their apartment building or something, odds are they're familiar with most of the people to some degree that live there. So, they're puzzled by these children that they've never seen before. And it's very common for the victims to ask questions like that. What are you doing in this building? Or do you live in this building? Or, where are you from? And these kids, they will never answer questions. They simply redirect. And they ask their questions again, So
and these are local questions. I'm thinking, because you talk too about the men in black, and there are ways to get them off balance, and to see if you can get some piece of information out of them. I just think it's an important aspect of this whole investigation into what's coming into our reality, because these things, like we discussed at the beginning, they're coming in more and more, and we are at their mercy until we can get a grip, get grounded, and start pointing the finger back at them to try to get some answers here, and also figure out how to protect ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that they don't adhere to the rules of our reality. So
right.
Trying to, and I understand your point, I think it's a very good one and a valid one, but attempting to do that and considering that they don't really adhere to what we're experiencing here, it's going to be a very difficult thing. And that being the case, all we can do is continue to gather as much information as we can, because, that information and that knowledge is going to empower us to come to more conclusions in and of itself.
Now, before we end the show, I got to ask you about Dogman. Have you talked to people who have experienced Dogman?
Yeah, I have. I've spent a good portion of my life in the Southwest, actually, where we have skinwalkers. And it's somewhat similar. These Dogman cases that have been popping up in the last couple of years have become a very curious thing. I think that there is a percentage of these accounts, I believe, that are probably some kind of more like a Bigfoot type creature. But, there's some incredible work out there. Linda Godfrey is a friend of mine, has done some amazing work on the whole Beast of Bray Road legend. If you go back through some of the older posts in my blog, you'll see some things that I have dug up over the years, again, in very old folklore journals and various news accounts and so forth, about people in the 1800s, for instance, encountering what they described as werewolves. And, this is essentially, this is Dogman. It's the same thing. Dogman's a newer term, but, classical European settlers, if they saw something like that, they would say, oh, it's a werewolf, because that's right. That's what all their lore was. And, there are some weird accounts from people that there's no reason they would make these things up, whether it's last week or 1842. It's puzzling. You have to wonder exactly what is it hiding out there. And I think the whole thing with these cryptids is pretty fascinating. A lot of people have the misconception that in this country we really kind of have explored everything, and these things can't be out there because someone, would know it or see them more often. And I'm like, no, listen, I often tell people, I say, get a topographic map, just of your state, if you live, especially if you live out west. A lot of states, there's a vast amount of wilderness area where people just aren't there on a daily basis. And it's very, very possible that there are unknown and undiscovered creatures living out in the wild.
Yes, and let's talk for a moment about David Paulides' work. I mean, he's been researching case after case of people that have gone missing out there, and we have to keep asking, who is taking them? Sometimes they are never found. And then there's stories, as you mentioned, from the 1800s. There was a little girl, and I'm sure you're familiar with this one, who was with her father, who had a logging enterprise, and she disappeared. When they finally found her, I believe it was 2 miles or so away from where she went missing, and they saw a big creature on a log and then jump across the river, run down the river in a flash. And they did, thank God, find this little girl, and they asked her, why didn't you respond to us when we called to you? And she said, he wouldn't let me. Who's he? Yeah. And she said it was the dog man or wolf man. I forget exactly what she called him, but it was something with this canine head that she described that also ate her hat. She said, ate my hat. I mean, it's just, out of the mouths of babes, she gave this account based on her own reference points, but you have to wonder, did she see Dogman? Did she get taken by him? Is that what's one of the things that's taking people in these forests?
Yeah, very possible. I mean, there's an equally compelling account from the 1800s about these people in Pennsylvania who were working a logging area. And now this is Pennsylvania Dutch country. So they were having an issue with what they described as werewolves attacking the wagons and attacking the horses that were carrying the logs down the mountain.
Oh my
so
God.
They painted hex symbols on the wheels of the wagon in an attempt to ward off what they believed were werewolves attacking their animals. So, again, this is not something that these people were just making up on a lark. These are people who were, they were trying to eke out their livelihood, and they were threatened by something. So, it's fascinating. And of course, you always have a contingent of people who say, no, it's all made up, or is, misidentified, blah, blah, blah. But, you have to dig into these cases, and you'll find that there's so much intriguing material out there that is just unexplained. It really is.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, enlightening everybody in our audience and us about all of these creatures. And I recommend that everybody buy all of your books so they can get familiar with what's out there and get informed, get involved with asking questions to try to figure this stuff out. And we've got to come together on this. These things are in our reality. Your book, The Intruders, discusses that at length. So again, David, thank you so much. We hope you'll come back when your next book is out. What is your next book going to be on?
Oh, let's see. The next one that is actually, there's a DVD out next month about Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is a very strange, anomalous area. And then there's a volume 2 of Wood Knots, which is a Sasquatch series. That'll be out this spring. And then several other projects coming from me this year also. Just check out my blog at twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com, and you'll find more information there.
Well, thank you, David, and we'll let people know when things become available. Again, terrific information. A pleasure to talk to you tonight, even though you've scared us half to death. That's okay.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And next week we'll be back with another show. We've got Patrice Chaplin coming to talk about the portal and the stone cradle. Amazing, amazing information. You're not going to want to miss this. So join us next week. And until then, we'll see you on the Blue Highway. Good night, everyone.
Good night.